Okay, so you want to run an airline. Buy some planes, sell some tickets, fly people from one city to another, watch the money come in. Simple enough. Airlines carried over 4.5 billion passengers globally last year, and the industry generated close to $900 billion in revenue. Surely that adds up to a fortune. It doesn't, not really. The airline industry is one of the only businesses on Earth that can move that much money every year and still barely keep its head above water. Let's start with the number that explains everything. The global airline industry's average net profit margin sits at roughly 3 to 4% in a good year. Compare that to a company like Apple, which routinely posts margins above 25%, or even a grocery chain, which typically clears 2 to 3%. Airlines move billions of dollars and dollars worth of people and cargo, and at the end of the year, they keep about 3 or 4 cents of every dollar that came in the door. Sometimes less, sometimes nothing at all. Here's the part almost nobody thinks about when they buy a $200 ticket. Before that plane ever leaves the gate, the airline is already carrying enormous fixed costs that don't care whether the flight is full or empty. A single wide-body aircraft like a Boeing 777 costs $300 to $440 million to buy new. Airlines almost never pay cash. They finance these purchases over 10 to 15 years, or lease them instead, and lease payments on a single aircraft can run $500,000 to $1 million a month, depending on the model and age. Multiply that across a fleet of 200 or 300 planes, and you're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars in fixed aircraft costs before a single passenger boards. Then there's fuel, and this is the number that can make or break an entire year. Fuel typically represents 20 to 30% of an airline's total operating costs, and it is almost entirely outside the airline's control. A single Boeing 777 burns roughly 5,600 gallons of fuel per hour. At $2.50 to $3 a gallon, that's $14,000 to $17,000 an hour just to keep the engines running, before you factor in a single crew salary or airport fee. When oil prices spike, and they do regularly, an airline's single largest controllable sounding expense becomes almost entirely uncontrollable overnight. Then there's labor. Pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, gate agents, and ground crew make up roughly 30 to 35% of an airline's total costs. A senior captain at a major U.S. carrier can earn $300,000 to $400,000 a year, and airlines are contractually required to staff specific ratios of crew per aircraft regardless of how full the flight is. A nearly empty regional flight still needs the same 2 pilots and flight attendants as a completely full one. Then there's the part that quietly bleeds airlines dry every single day: airport and landing fees. Every time a plane touches down, the airline pays the airport a landing fee based on aircraft weight, plus gate rental fees, plus fees for using jet bridges, baggage systems, and de-icing equipment in cold climates. At a major hub airport, these fees alone can run tens of thousands of dollars per flight, and airlines have almost no ability to negotiate them down because there's usually only one airport serving a given city. Add it all up: aircraft financing, fuel, labor, airport fees, maintenance, insurance, and a mid-size airline's total operating costs can run $10 to $15 billion a year. And this is before you account for the single most brutal number in the entire industry: the break-even load factor. Because a plane has a fixed number of seats regardless of how many people actually buy tickets, airlines have to fill somewhere between 75 and 80% of every flight's seats just to cover costs. Fly at 60% capacity for a stretch of months, which happens regularly during slow seasons, economic downturns, or global disruptions, and an airline can bleed cash on flights that still take off completely on schedule. So here's the real question. If margins are this thin and costs are this brutal, why does anyone still want to run an airline? Because the ticket price you see is almost never the whole story. Airlines make a shockingly large share of their actual profit from things that have nothing to do with the seat itself. Baggage fees alone generated over $7 billion for U.S. airlines in a recent year. Seat selection fees, change fees, priority boarding, and in-flight sales add billions more. And then there's the real engine hiding in plain sight: frequent flyer programs. Airlines sell miles in bulk to credit card companies, banks, and hotel chains, often at a profit margin far higher than flying passengers ever generates. Delta's SkyMiles program alone has been valued by analysts at tens of billions of dollars, arguably worth more than the airline's entire fleet of aircraft. Here's the counterintuitive piece. You'd think a bigger airline with more planes and more routes would have more room to absorb a bad year. And in some ways it does, through scale efficiencies on fuel purchasing and maintenance contracts. But bigger also means a much larger daily fixed cost that has to be covered before a single dollar of profit shows up, which is exactly why airlines have historically been one of the most bankruptcy-prone industries in America. Since deregulation in 1978, more than 100 U.S. airlines have filed for bankruptcy at least once, including giants like Delta, United, and American, each of which has gone through Chapter 11 restructuring at some point in the last few decades. The clearest example of how fast this business can collapse came in 2020, when COVID-19 grounded global air travel almost overnight. Airlines worldwide lost an estimated $370 billion in revenue that year alone. U.S. carriers burned through tens of millions of dollars in cash every single day just to keep planes maintained and staff on payroll, even with almost no passengers flying. The industry survived largely because governments stepped in with tens of billions of dollars in emergency aid, because letting airlines collapse entirely would have crippled national economies far more than the bailouts cost. So let's do the actual math on why this business somehow keeps attracting investors. A well-run major airline might generate $50 billion in annual revenue with a 3 to 5% net margin in a strong year, netting $1.50 to $2.50 billion in profit. That sounds substantial until you realize the same airline is carrying tens of billions in aircraft debt and lease obligations that never fully go away. Flip to a bad year. Fuel spikes, a recession hits, a pandemic grounds half the fleet, and that same 3% margin can flip to a 5 or 10% loss just as fast, because the fixed costs never shrink to match the empty seats. That gap between a good year and a catastrophic one is the entire story of why airlines barely make any profit. Not because the business is poorly run, because it is one of the only industries on earth where razor-thin margins, brutal fixed costs, and forces completely outside anyone's control all collide in the same building, every single day, on every single flight.